When we first saw the house, it felt like stepping into a different time. The towering Victorian structure stood at the end of a winding gravel road, framed by ancient oaks that swayed like silent sentinels. It had been left to us in a distant relative's will, a relative we barely remembered, but apparently, we were the only surviving heirs. As we pushed open the heavy oak door for the first time, the house seemed alive with its own secrets. Dust motes floated in the beams of sunlight streaming through stained glass windows, and the faint scent of wood polish and something metallic hung in the air. But it wasn't the creaking floors or the eerie silence that struck me. It was the mirrors. They were everywhere. Every hallway, every room, even the landings of the grand staircase were lined with antique mirrors of all shapes and sizes. Some were ornate, with gilded frames and elaborate carvings of vines and cherubs. Others were simple, their frames chipped and worn, as if they'd been there for centuries. "Creepy," my younger sister Lily muttered, running her fingers along the edge of a mirror in the hallway. "Why would anyone need this many mirrors?" Our father, a practical man with little patience for whimsy, shrugged. "It's probably just part of the decor. People back then were eccentric." I didn't share his confidence. There was something about the mirrors that unsettled me. The way they reflected the light felt wrong. Too sharp, too cold. That evening, as we unpacked, I found myself drawn to one of the larger mirrors in the upstairs hallway. Its frame was cracked in places, the gold leaf peeling to reveal dark wood beneath. I stood before it, staring at my own reflection, but something felt off. My reflection didn't quite match me. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. A tilt of the head that I hadn't made, or the faintest flicker of movement when I stood perfectly still. "Stop staring at yourself," Lily teased as she walked by, breaking the moment. I blinked and turned away, shaking off the unease. That night, as we sat around the dining table in the candlelight, the house's electricity was unreliable at best. Dad asked us a question that set the tone for the days to come. "Do you think this place is haunted?" We laughed, though it was the nervous kind of laughter that comes when you're not entirely sure what the truth might be. Later, when the house had fallen into silence and the others were asleep, I stood at the top of the stairs, staring at the hallway of mirrors. The flickering glow of the single working light bulb reflected endlessly, creating the illusion of an infinite tunnel. And then I saw it, a figure. It moved at the edge of the reflection, a shadow slipping between the mirrors, too far back to be one of us. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to see, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. I shook my head, telling myself it was nothing. A trick of the light, my tired mind playing games. But as I turned to go back to my room, my reflection lingered in the mirror, just a moment too long. The next morning, the house seemed almost normal. Bright sunlight poured through the tall windows, chasing away the gloom from the night before. The mirrors gleamed, their antique frames catching the golden light. For a moment, I wondered if what I'd seen the previous night had just been my imagination. Dad had already thrown himself into tidying the place up. He was in the study, sorting through dusty old ledgers and piles of brittle papers left behind by the previous owner. Lily, on the other hand, had taken to wandering the house, her curiosity leading her into every nook and cranny. "Come check this out," she called from one of the upstairs bedrooms. I followed her voice, finding her standing in front of a massive, oval-shaped mirror that hung over an ornate dresser. The frame was carved with images of birds and flowers, but the detail was so intricate it almost seemed alive. "Look at this thing," Lily said, running her hand along the edge of the frame. "It's beautiful, but kind of weird." I nodded, my eyes drawn to the glass. The mirror's surface was slightly warped, distorting our reflections in subtle, unsettling ways. As I moved closer, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The reflections weren't quite in sync with us. When Lily moved her hand, her reflection lagged behind, as though caught in a delay. My own reflection did the same, its movements just a fraction of a second slower than mine. "You see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lily tilted her head. "See what?" "The delay," I said, pointing at her reflection. She frowned, staring at herself in the mirror. I don't know, wait. She paused, her face paling slightly. That's weird, right? Mirrors don't do that. No, I said, stepping back. They don't. We both stared at the mirror, waiting for it to do something else. But the longer we looked, the more normal it seemed. Eventually, Lily laughed nervously, shaking her head. Maybe it's just old glass, she said. They didn't make mirrors the way they do now. I wanted to believe her. I really did. That night, as we sat around the fireplace, Dad mentioned something he'd found in the study, a journal belonging to the house's previous owner, a man named Elias Crane. He was a collector, Dad said, flipping through the worn pages. Mirrors, obviously, but he wrote about them like they were more than just antiques. He believed they had special properties. Like what? Lily asked, leaning forward. Dad frowned, squinting at the cramped handwriting. It's hard to tell. Some of it's written in strange symbols, almost like a code. But he kept mentioning something about the other side. He seemed obsessed with the idea that mirrors don't just reflect, they connect. Connect to what? I asked, my voice low. Dad shrugged. He doesn't say, just that you have to be careful. He called it the reflection threshold, whatever that means. A chill ran down my spine. The figure I'd seen in the mirror the night before, the delayed reflections. Everything felt connected to those cryptic words. After dinner, I couldn't resist the pull of the mirrors. I wandered through the house, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls. Each mirror I passed seemed to watch me, the reflections sharper than they had any right to be. When I reached the mirror in the upstairs hallway, the one that had unsettled me the most, I stopped. The light bulb above flickered, casting uneven shadows across the glass. I leaned closer, staring at my reflection. It stared back, but something was wrong. The reflection wasn't just delayed, it was off. My face was distorted subtly at first. My smile was too wide, my eyes too dark. I raised a hand, and my reflection did the same, but its movements were too smooth, too deliberate. And then it stopped. My hand was still raised, but my reflection's hand fell to its side. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. As I watched, my reflection tilted its head, its lips curling into a slow, sinister grin. The sinister grin on my reflection's face froze me in place. My heart pounded in my chest, the sound almost deafening in the suffocating silence of the hallway. The reflection raised its hand again, not in sync with me, but on its own, deliberate and slow. Hello, I whispered, the word trembling on my lips. The reflection's grin widened, and then it mouthed something. The words didn't reach my ears, but I knew they were meant for me. Come closer. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. My flashlight, clutched tightly in my hand, flickered, its beams struggling against the oppressive shadows. Behind me, I heard soft footsteps. I spun around, half expecting to see Lily or Dad, but the hallway was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, my reflection was normal again. No sinister smile, no independent movements. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I told Lily what I'd seen. She sat on the edge of my bed, her expression caught between skepticism and fear. You're just tired, she said, though her voice lacked confidence. This house is creepy, yeah, but reflections don't just move like that. I know what I saw. I insisted. Something's wrong with those mirrors, Lily. And it's getting worse. Before she could respond, Dad's voice called from downstairs. Kids, come here now. We rushed to the dining room, where Dad stood staring at the largest mirror in the house, a full-length monstrosity that hung on the far wall. Its surface was cracked, a long, jagged line running from corner to corner like a lightning bolt. Did one of you do this? He demanded, his voice tight. No, Lily said immediately. We didn't even come in here yesterday. I shook my head. It wasn't like this last night. Dad frowned, running his fingers over the crack. Mirrors don't just break on their own. These things are antique. They're valuable. Be careful, okay? We nodded, but my eyes were fixed on the crack. There was something about it that felt unnatural, like it wasn't just a flaw in the glass, but something more. As Dad turned to leave, I noticed a faint noise coming from the mirror, a soft tapping, like fingers drumming on the other side of the glass. "Do you hear that?" I asked Lily. She frowned, listening. "Hear what?" I leaned closer, my breath fogging the cold surface. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, and then it stopped. I stared at my reflection, waiting for it to move again, but it didn't. Instead, something else caught my attention. There was a shape behind me. At first, I thought it was Lily, but the figure was too tall, too shadowy. Its form was indistinct, more like a smudge on the glass than a person. But it was there, hovering just behind my shoulder. I turned quickly, but no one was there. "Eric," Lily's voice was tight. "You're scaring me." I turned back to the mirror, but the figure was gone. That night, the tapping returned, louder than before. It came from every mirror in the house, echoing through the halls like a macabre symphony. Lying in bed, I tried to drown out the sound with a pillow over my head, but it was relentless. It felt like the mirrors were alive, trying to get my attention. Unable to take it anymore, I grabbed my flashlight and crept into the hallway. The tapping grew louder as I approached the largest mirror in the dining room, the one with the jagged crack. My reflection stared back at me, its face pale and gaunt, its eyes wide with terror. It raised a hand, but this time it wasn't beckoning me. It was pointing. I followed the gesture to the edge of the mirror, where the crack began. The glass seemed to ripple, distorting my reflection like water disturbed by a stone. And then, faintly, I heard a voice, muffled and distant, coming from beyond the glass. "Help me." The whispered plea, "Help me," sent a shiver down my spine. I stood frozen in front of the cracked mirror, my breath fogging the glass. The voice came again, louder this time, as though whoever was speaking was just on the other side. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice trembling. No answer. Behind me, I heard a soft creak like a floorboard bending under weight. My flashlight flickered as I spun around, but the hallway was empty. The only sound was the steady patter of rain against the windows. When I turned back to the mirror, my reflection wasn't alone. A figure stood beside it, half in shadow. It was a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her hollow eyes locked onto mine. Her lips moved soundlessly, forming words I couldn't hear. "Lily!" I shouted, backing away from the mirror. Footsteps pounded up the stairs, and moments later, Lily appeared, breathless and confused. "What's going on?" I pointed to the mirror, but the woman was gone. My reflection stared back at me, normal except for the fear etched into my face. "There was someone there," I said, my voice shaking. "A woman. She was in the mirror." Lily glanced at the mirror, then at me. "You're scaring yourself, Eric. This place is creepy enough without you imagining things." "I'm not imagining it," I snapped. I heard her voice. She said, "Help me." Lily's expression softened, but there was fear in her eyes too. Maybe it's a trick. Old mirrors can do weird things with light and sound, right? Do they also show people who aren't there? She didn't answer. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Dad was too preoccupied with cleaning out the study to notice our unease, and Lily stayed close to me, as if afraid to be alone. That evening, as the rain continued to pour, we found ourselves back in the study. Dad had unearthed more of Elias Crane's journals, their pages yellowed with age and filled with cramped, spidery handwriting. "Listen to this," Dad said, flipping to a section near the middle. He wrote, "The glass is the gateway. It reflects not just our world, but the other. They watch from beyond, waiting for the moment when we look too closely." "What does that mean?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dad shrugged. "Who knows? The guy was probably just eccentric. But it's interesting, right?" "Interesting isn't the word I'd use," I muttered, glancing nervously at the nearest mirror. Dad laughed, oblivious. "Well, if nothing else, it makes for a good ghost story." That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain had turned into a storm, thunder rumbling in the distance and lightning casting eerie flashes across the walls of my room. The tapping sound started again, soft at first, then louder, more insistent. I tried to ignore it, but then came the voice. "Eric, please." I bolted upright, my heart racing. The voice was coming from the mirror above my dresser. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it on the glass. My reflection stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed, but there was something behind it. The woman. She was closer now, her hands pressed against the inside of the glass, as though trying to push through. Her lips moved, but the words were muffled, distorted. "What do you want?" I whispered, stepping closer. Her hollow eyes locked onto mine, and her voice became clearer. "It's coming." The words sent a jolt of fear through me. "What's coming?" She didn't answer. Her face twisted in terror, and she began pounding on the glass, her movements frantic and desperate. Suddenly, the mirror cracked. The sound was deafening, like ice breaking under pressure. I stumbled back, shielding my face as shards of glass rained onto the floor. When I looked again, the mirror was whole, as though it had never been damaged. But the woman was gone. And my reflection? It was smiling. My reflection's smile wasn't kind or reassuring. It was wrong. Too wide, too sharp, stretching far beyond what should have been possible. The sight rooted me in place, my pulse thundering in my ears. I didn't smile. I didn't move. But it did. The reflection tilted its head, studying me with dark, unblinking eyes. Slowly, deliberately, it raised a hand and placed it against the glass. For a moment, I thought I could feel its touch, a cold, tingling pressure against my chest. I stumbled back, my flashlight slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. When I looked again, the reflection was gone. It was just me in the glass, pale and trembling, my breathing ragged. "Lily," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Dad." I bolted out of the room, nearly tripping over the hallway rug as I raced toward Lily's door. I didn't knock, I just threw it open. She sat up in bed, startled. "Eric, what the hell?" "It's the mirrors," I said, gasping for breath. "There's something in them. It's watching us." She frowned, but before she could respond, a loud crash echoed through the house. "What was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, already moving toward the stairs. "Stay here." "Like hell I will," she said, grabbing a flashlight from her nightstand and following me. The noise had come from the study. The door was ajar, swinging gently on its hinges. "Dad," I called, stepping inside. The room was in chaos. Papers and books were scattered across the floor, and the desk chair lay overturned. The large mirror on the far wall, the one Dad had been examining earlier, was cracked, a jagged line running from one corner to the other. But Dad wasn't there. "What the?" Lily trailed off, shining her flashlight over the mess. I moved closer to the mirror, drawn to it despite every instinct screaming at me to stay away. The glass rippled faintly, as though something were pressing against it from the other side. "Eric, don't," Lily said, grabbing my arm. "I just need to see," I said, shaking her off. I leaned in, my breath fogging the glass. At first, there was nothing, just my own pale reflection staring back at me. But then the surface began to shift. It showed the study, but not as it was. The room in the mirror was darker, the furniture decayed and covered in dust. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the walls were streaked with what looked like soot. And in the center of the room, standing motionless, was Dad. "Dad!" I shouted, pounding on the glass. "Can you hear me?" He didn't respond. His face was slack, his eyes unfocused, as though he were sleepwalking. Behind him, shadows began to move, dark, writhing shapes that crept closer and closer. "We have to do something," Lily said, her voice frantic. "What can we do?" I shot back, my own panic rising. The shadows reached Dad, enveloping him in their inky tendrils. His expression didn't change, but as the darkness consumed him, he slowly turned toward the mirror. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw recognition, a flicker of fear. And then he smiled, the same too wide, too sharp smile I'd seen on my own reflection. I stumbled back, nearly colliding with Lily. "This can't be happening," I muttered. "We have to get him out of there," Lily said, grabbing my arm. "How?" She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed a heavy paperweight from the desk and swung it at the mirror. The glass cracked, but didn't break. The surface rippled violently, and a deep, guttural sound echoed through the room, like a growl, low and menacing. "Hit it again," I shouted. Lily swung again, and the mirror shattered. For a moment, everything was silent. The fragments of glass lay scattered on the floor, reflecting the flickering beam of our flashlights. But the relief was short-lived. From the shards came the sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate, growing louder. And then, one by one, the reflections began to move, not in the glass, in the room. The footsteps grew louder, echoing unnaturally in the room, as if coming from every direction. My breath caught in my throat as the shards of broken mirror began to tremble, their surfaces rippling like disturbed water. Then they moved. One shard, no bigger than my palm, slid across the floor with a sharp scrape. Another followed, then another, forming a jagged path toward us. The scattered pieces reflected distorted fragments of the room. Our faces, the furniture, the cracked walls, but they weren't still. The reflections in the shards were alive. "Eric," Lily whispered, her voice tight with terror. I couldn't respond. My eyes were locked on the largest fragment of the mirror, where my father's reflection still lingered. He was smiling, that same horrific grin that stretched far too wide, and his head tilted unnaturally to one side. Then he stepped forward, not out of the mirror. There was no mirror left but from the reflection itself. The figure emerged from the glass, its body forming piece by piece as though being sculpted from smoke and shadow. "Dad!" Lily's voice broke, her hand clutching my arm in a vice grip. It wasn't him. The thing that stood before us was a grotesque mimicry, its movements jerky and wrong. Its eyes were hollow voids, and its too wide smile showed far too many teeth. The fragments of glass around it twitched and scraped, drawn toward its feet like iron filings to a magnet. "Lily," I said, my voice trembling. "Run." "What about you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just go." I shoved her toward the door, my heart pounding. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting between me and the thing that had taken our father's shape. Then she turned and bolted, her footsteps echoing down the hall. I was alone with it now. The creature took a step closer, its movements unnervingly smooth. The fragments of glass followed it, skittering across the floor and piecing themselves together like puzzle pieces. "What do you want?" I demanded, though my voice cracked with fear. It didn't answer. Instead, it raised a hand, its long, twisted fingers reaching toward me. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood. I backed away, grabbing the nearest object, a heavy candlestick from the desk, and brandished it like a weapon. "Stay back." The creature's grin widened, its head tilting further. It didn't stop. With a surge of adrenaline, I swung the candlestick with all my strength. The impact landed squarely on the creature's arm, shattering it into shards of reflective glass. For a moment, I thought I'd won, but the fragments didn't stay broken. They rose from the floor, hovering in the air like shards of ice, and reassembled themselves into the arm I had just destroyed. The creature flexed its hand, the smile never leaving its face. I stumbled back, my mind racing. The thing wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was something else entirely, something that couldn't be broken or stopped. The door slammed behind me, and I turned to see Lily standing there, holding the journal we'd found earlier. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was determination in her expression. "The mirrors," she said, her voice trembling. "They're not just reflections. They're gateways, portals to another world." "I figured that out already," I snapped, dodging as the creature swiped at me with its newly reformed hand. "There's something in here about closing them," she continued, flipping through the journal's pages. "It says we have to trap them back in the glass." "How?" Her eyes darted over the text. "We need a mirror, any mirror, and we have to force it back through. But it has to be done before dawn." I looked at the creature, now advancing on us with unnatural speed, its body rippling like liquid shadow. "Do we even have another mirror?" Lily nodded, pointing toward the far wall. A small, oval-shaped mirror hung above the fireplace, its surface cracked but still intact. "Great," I said, grabbing her hand. "Let's hope it works." We moved toward the mirror, the creature following close behind. Its hollow eyes never left us, and as we reached the fireplace, it lunged. The creature lunged, its long, distorted limbs reaching for me. I shoved Lily behind me, swinging the candlestick with all the force I could muster. The impact sent a spray of shards from its chest, but they reassembled almost instantly, the jagged edges of its form snapping back into place like a grotesque puzzle. "Eric," Lily screamed, holding up the journal. "It says you have to lure it toward the mirror. Get it to face itself. How do I do that?" I shouted, dodging as the creature's claw-like hand swiped inches from my face. "Make it follow you. Just don't let it catch you." The thing's grin widened, as if it understood what she had said. Its hollow eyes locked onto mine, and it lunged again. I ducked, adrenaline flooding my veins, and bolted toward the far side of the room, my boots skidding on the wooden floor. "Come on," I yelled, waving the candlestick. "Come get me." The creature turned sharply, its body rippling as it moved, and began to follow. Its steps were deliberate, its movements unervingly smooth despite the shards of reflective glass constantly shifting within it. I could feel its cold, unnatural presence behind me, closer with every step. Lily stood by the mirror above the fireplace, frantically flipping through the journal. It says the mirror will absorb it, but only if its reflection meets its true form. I didn't fully understand what that meant, but I didn't have time to argue. The creature's hand grazed my shoulder, cold and sharp, and I stumbled, barely keeping my footing. "Eric, now?" Lily screamed. I turned sharply, dodging the creature's next swipe, and bolted toward the mirror. As I neared it, I caught a glimpse of the thing in the reflective surface. Its form was even more grotesque in the glass, its hollow eyes impossibly deep, its smile a jagged, gaping maw. "Come on!" I shouted again, positioning myself in front of the mirror. The creature paused, its head tilting as it stared at its own reflection. For a moment, it seemed confused, its form flickering like a flame caught in the wind. Then it shrieked, a high, keening wail that sent a shiver down my spine, and lunged toward the mirror. The instant its body collided with the glass, the room erupted in chaos. The mirror shattered outward in a spray of blinding light, shards of glass swirling like a storm. The creature's distorted form began to collapse, its limbs twisting and breaking apart, drawn into the fragments like water spiraling down a drain. Lily and I ducked, shielding our faces as the shards whipped around us. The creature screamed again, its voice fractured and fading, until finally the storm stopped. When I opened my eyes, the mirror was whole again. The surface was smooth and unbroken, as though it had never been damaged. The creature was gone. We stood there in silence, our breaths heavy, the room eerily still. "Did it work?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. I stepped closer to the mirror, my reflection staring back at me. It was normal. No twisted smile, no independent movements. Just me. "I think so," I said, my voice shaky. "It's gone." Lily sagged against the wall, clutching the journal to her chest. "We have to get rid of these mirrors, Eric. All of them. Burn them, smash them, whatever it takes." "I couldn't agree more," I said. But as we turned to leave the room, the mirror behind us flickered. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something move in the glass. A shadow, faint and distant, slipping deeper into the reflection. I didn't tell Lily. The following morning, the house felt heavier than ever. The air was thick, oppressive, and the rain outside showed no sign of stopping. I woke to the sound of Lily rummaging through the kitchen, muttering angrily to herself. When I found her, she was holding a crowbar in one hand and Dad's toolbox in the other. "Lily," I said cautiously, "what are you doing?" Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair disheveled. "I'm done, Eric. These mirrors are going. Every single one of them." I glanced at the journal, lying open on the counter beside her. Pages were marked with sticky notes, underlined passages scrawled in red ink. She had stayed up all night reading, and it showed. "Smashing one mirror won't be enough," she said, as if reading my mind. "It's all connected. The mirrors, the house, everything. If we don't destroy them all, this thing is going to come back." "Do you even know how to destroy them?" I asked, my voice low. That thing didn't exactly break easily. She hesitated. The journal says there's a ritual. Something about severing the link between the mirrors and whatever world they connect to. But it has to be done in the room where it started. The study, I said, dread pooling in my stomach. She nodded. We spent hours preparing. Every mirror in the house had to be moved to the study. An exhausting task, given how many there were. Each time we carried one, I could feel it watching me, the weight of its gaze pressing against my back. The study was a chaotic mess by the time we were done. Mirrors lined every wall, leaning precariously against the furniture. Their reflective surfaces created an infinite, disorienting maze of overlapping reflections. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in the room. Lily spread the journal open on the desk, carefully marking the pages with a trembling hand. "This ritual is intense," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're supposed to light a circle of candles around the largest mirror. Then we have to recite this incantation." I looked at the passage she pointed to, the words scrawled in a strange, jagged script. Just looking at them made my head throb. "And then what?" I asked. "Then," she said, swallowing hard, "we smash it. The biggest mirror, the one that anchors the others. If we do it right, it should destroy the connection. And if we do it wrong?" She didn't answer. As night fell, we lit the candles around the massive mirror in the study. Its surface was polished to a blinding sheen, reflecting the flickering flames in our pale faces. "Are you ready?" Lily asked, her voice shaking. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was. She began to read the incantation aloud, her voice trembling but steady. The words felt wrong, heavy, as though they didn't belong in this world. The air grew colder with each syllable, the candles flickering wildly. And then the mirrors began to hum. It was a low, vibrating sound, like the deep note of a tuning fork, building in intensity. The reflections in the glass began to shift, distorting and warping. Shadows danced across their surfaces, shapes moving independently of us. "Keep going," I shouted, my voice barely audible over the growing hum. Lily's voice faltered for a moment, but she pressed on, her words growing louder and more frantic. The largest mirror began to ripple, its surface undulating like water. And then it shattered. The explosion of glass was deafening. Shards flew in every direction, the candles snuffing out in an instant. The room plunged into darkness, the hum replaced by a deafening silence. I felt something brush past me, cold, sharp, and heavy. "Lily!" I called, scrambling to find her in the dark. "I'm here," she shouted back, her voice panicked. A faint glow came from where the largest mirror had been. Its frame was empty now, but through it, I could see something. It was another world, dark, twisting, and alive. Shadows moved within it, countless shapes writhing and clawing at the edges of the frame, trying to push through. "Eric," Lily said, her voice trembling. We didn't close it. The room began to shake, the walls groaning as the shadows reached out, tendrils of darkness spilling into the study. "Smash the others," Lily screamed. The air was alive with chaos, shadows spilling from the broken frame, the walls trembling as the sound of splintering wood and groaning glass filled the study. The darkness creeping into the room felt sentient, and the temperature plummeted until each breath emerged as a cloud. "Smash them," Lily screamed again, her voice nearly drowned out by the cacophony. I grabbed the crowbar she had brought earlier and swung at the nearest mirror. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, shards scattering across the floor. For a brief moment, the shadows recoiled, writhing away from the impact. "It's working," Lily shouted, already swinging a hammer at another mirror. But as the shadows retreated from one mirror, they surged toward another, their tendrils writhing into the reflections. I saw glimpses of the other world through the glass. Dark forests, twisted landscapes, and pale figures moving just beyond the surface. Each smash seemed to weaken the connection, but it wasn't fast enough. The largest frame, the one where the portal had opened, remained empty, its edges glowing faintly with an eerie light. From within, something enormous began to emerge. A hand. It wasn't human. Long, jagged fingers scraped against the edges of the frame, their surface shimmering like liquid glass. The hand flexed, its movements unnaturally fluid, as it began to pull itself through. "Eric, hurry!" Lily screamed, her voice cracking with terror. I swung the crowbar again, smashing another mirror, but the creature in the frame didn't stop. Its head appeared next, featureless save for two deep voids where eyes should have been. It tilted its head, as though observing us, and then it reached out. The hand slammed onto the floor, splintering the wood beneath it. "Lily, get back!" I yelled, throwing myself at another mirror. The shards cut my arms and hands, but I didn't care. Each mirror I destroyed sent a ripple through the room, the shadows recoiling like they'd been burned. The creature let out a guttural, inhuman sound, a mix of grinding metal and a deep, resonant hum that shook the walls. "It's getting weaker," Lily shouted, smashing another mirror. But we were running out of time. The creature's second hand emerged, gripping the frame as it began to pull its massive body through. Its head turned toward me, and though it had no mouth, I could feel it smile. The mirrors that remained began to ripple violently, their reflections shifting and distorting. I saw my own face in one, but it wasn't me. It was my reflection from before, the one with the sinister grin. The reflection mouthed something I couldn't hear, but I didn't need to. Its meaning was clear. "You can't stop us." "Eric, the last one." Lily pointed to a tall, narrow mirror leaning against the wall. I ran toward it, raising the crowbar high, but before I could swing, the creature lashed out. Its hand struck me hard, sending me sprawling across the floor. The impact knocked the crowbar from my hands, and pain shot through my ribs. "Eric!" Lily screamed, but I could barely hear her. My vision blurred, and the room seemed to tilt. The creature reached for me, its jagged fingers inches from my face, when Lily stepped between us. "Hey!" she shouted, holding a shard of broken glass in her trembling hand. "You want him? You'll have to get through me first." The creature hesitated, its head tilting as if puzzled. That was all the time I needed. With a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed the crowbar and threw it with all my strength. It struck the last mirror dead center, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The reaction was immediate. The shadows screamed, a deafening, bone-chilling sound that reverberated through the house. The creature recoiled, its body disintegrating into a swirling mass of black mist. The light from the empty frame flared, blindingly bright, and then everything went silent. When I opened my eyes, the study was still. The mirrors were gone, every single one reduced to shards of glass scattered across the floor. The frame that had served as the gateway was empty, its surface cracked and lifeless. Lily knelt beside me, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Are you okay?" I nodded weakly, my whole body aching. "Is it gone?" She glanced around the room, her expression wary. "I think so," but as we helped each other to our feet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us. The silence in the house was oppressive, pressing down on us like a weight. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant groan of the storm outside felt amplified in the absence of the mirrors. The study was a graveyard of shattered glass, the fragments reflecting faint glimmers of light like scattered stars. "It's over," Lily said softly, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "We did it." I wanted to believe her, but my gut told me otherwise. The air still felt wrong, heavy with something unseen. The house itself seemed to be holding its breath. "Let's get out of here," I said, my voice hoarse. We made our way to the front door, moving cautiously through the darkened halls. The absence of the mirror should have felt like a relief, but instead, it left the house feeling incomplete, hollow. When we reached the entryway, Lily paused. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I froze, listening. At first, there was nothing, just the soft patter of rain against the windows. But then I heard it, a faint sound, almost too quiet to notice. A tapping. "No," I whispered, my blood running cold. Lily turned slowly, her flashlight beams sweeping across the hallway. It landed on a small, round mirror hanging by the coat rack. "I thought we smashed them all." she said, her voice trembling. So did I replied, stepping closer. The mirror's surface was pristine, untouched by the chaos that had unfolded in the study. But as I stared into it, my reflection began to shift. It smiled. "No," I said again, backing away. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and a shadow began to take shape within it. A tall, thin figure with hollow eyes and a jagged grin. "Lily," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We have to go. Now." She didn't argue. We turned and ran, throwing the door open and racing into the storm. The rain soaked us instantly, the cold biting through our clothes as we stumbled down the gravel driveway toward the car. "Don't look back," I told her, my heart pounding. But as we reached the car, I couldn't help myself. I turned. The house stood silent in the rain, its dark windows like empty eyes. The front door was still open, swinging slightly in the wind. And in the dim light spilling from the doorway, I saw it. The mirror. It was no longer on the wall. It was standing upright, centered in the doorway, its surface glowing faintly. My reflection was there, watching me, but it wasn't alone. The shadow stood behind it, its hollow eyes locked onto mine. And then it stepped forward. I jumped into the car, slamming the door behind me. "Drive!" I shouted, my voice shaking. Lily didn't hesitate. The tires skidded on the wet gravel as we sped down the driveway, the house disappearing into the rain behind us. Epilogue. It's been 3 days since we left the house. We've told no one what happened. Who will believe us? But the mirrors, they're everywhere. In every bathroom, in every storefront, in every passing car, I see it. The reflection, the shadow. It hasn't followed us, at least not yet, but it's there waiting. And sometimes, when I catch my reflection out of the corner of my eye, I swear it isn't me. Final thought for the audience. The next time you see your reflection, take a moment to really look. Watch how it moves. Does it follow you exactly? Or does it linger just a moment too long? What would you do if it smiled at you first?